Back to one of our top stories, Title 42, the pandemic-era immigration policy that was put in place under former President Donald Trump, it has officially expired. Congressional lawmakers have different views on what ending the policy could mean for migrants waiting at the southern border.
It's inhumane. You know, asylum seekers are people. They are human beings escaping some disastrous circumstances that we have been a part of creating over many, many years of how we have harmed Central and South America. That's why they're migrating here.
Already have is a massive southern border crisis, and you have the end of Title 42 turns that crisis into a full-scale invasion. We've effectively given over the southern border of the United States to Mexican drug cartels.
Here to discuss is Ashley Etienne. She's a CBS News political contributor and former communications director for Vice President Harris, and then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and CBS News political analyst Leslie Sanchez. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
So, Ashley, how could the end of Title 42 impact both parties? I think it's telling that one of the lawmakers there said that this is an issue that has faced multiple administrations. The question, of course, is here we are in 2023. Does it feel to you as if the Biden administration was prepared for the end of Title 42? We all knew it was coming, but it does seem, as you look at the numbers of people that are amassing at the border, the number of people who are in dire straits who are looking to get in, that the notion that you would then just have these people come into the United States without any ability to track them because you don't want to overwhelm the border is perhaps not the best solution going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Congressman Bowman. I mean, this is a humanitarian crisis. There are people at the very center of this that are fleeing really depressed situations. I mean, the pandemic, dampened and really had an effect on the ground in terms of these countries. But this is a global problem, and it's one in which we've not addressed in 30 years. Either party has not taken this issue seriously enough. And so, again, I think we just need to remember these are people that shouldn't be treated as pawns. They shouldn't be shipped around the country. They shouldn't be seen as objects, but rather people who really need, as it says on, as former President Reagan says, and as it says on the Statue of Liberty, they need our leadership in the world. They need our humanitarian heart on this particular issue. But here's the thing, is that President Biden has really taken a lot of action. The first bill that he sent to Congress was an immigration reform bill. He's put 1,500 more troops on the border. They've increased the number of processing centers. So to some extent, he's done almost as much as he can do. Now, to give the Republicans some credit, they've passed a bill in the House. Now it's on the part of both the president and the leadership in Congress to demonstrate goodwill on this issue, that they don't want it to be a political issue any longer, but that we're taking this issue very seriously, collectively as a nation, and we're going to actually advance some legislation. And that's what's before us now, is Congress needs to act.
Leslie, I want to ask you about former President Trump's appearance on CNN this week. He touched on a lot of different things. He revisited a number of different grievances, but he also sort of said some things that I think people may find curious. He wouldn't commit to whether or not he wanted Russia or Ukraine to win the war. He said he would consider pardoning some of the January 6th rioters. He suggested that perhaps defaulting on the debt may not be that bad of a thing. And though the audience was quite enthusiastic, I'm sure there were people in the audience that questioned some of what he had to say. Robert Costa caught up with a New Hampshire state lawmaker. His name's Jason Osborne, and asked him a little bit to react to what he heard. And here's what he said.
Does this town hall and what you saw create an opening for a Trump alternative?
I think the opening was there, and this just kind of solidifies it. And President Trump is not changing his routine. He's not changing his rhetoric. Just never going to end. And I think, like I said, people are ready to move on.
How about that, Leslie? Though the audience was receptive, what's your take on that? Do you think his performance perhaps opened up or widened or solidified the options for an alternative?
Well, no doubt the former president has been successful at being that outlier. But being such an outsider, outside the traditional diplomatic and policy norms of the United States is not a good position for the Republican Party, and it's not going to be a good position if he wants to maintain someone is seen as the leader of the GOP moving into the next presidential. With that said, that's where the opportunity lies. There's people that really may still be favorable to the former president, feel that he has not been treated fairly. But fundamentally, he's so outside the lines now, especially in current realpolitik and the political and the atmospheric theater abroad. They don't feel that he has the aptitude to have the right solution. And that's where I think you're going to hear a lot more on national security, the threats not only with Russia but with China. That's going to be more of an issue I think you'll hear from other Republican contenders moving forward.
Ashley, as you know, President Biden was supposed to meet with congressional leaders today to continue discussions on the debt ceiling. Why can't the two sides find a solution?
Yeah, I mean, before we move on to this particular issue, I just wanted to raise one point, which I found very striking coming out of the town hall. I mean, obviously, it provides a lot of fodder for the Democratic Party. You know, members of my party are very excited about, you know, what happened. They're producing ads, you know, critiquing the president, former president. But what I found very striking about it is there's more and more Republicans that are now starting to take on the president head on and criticizing him, from Sununu to Chris Christie. I mean, they called him a liar, said he was a puppet of Putin. They also questioned his judgment, which I thought was pretty striking. Now, on the issue of the debt ceiling, you know, Congress sort of operates the same way I do. We wait to the very last minute to pay our bills. So this will go on for another couple of weeks, and I think that X date will sort of change. There's a lot of room that the government can move to actually not miss the deadline. But I was struck by what General Milley said yesterday, and that was China is now describing the United States as a defleeting power, as a weakening power, because we can't seem to get our act together on big issues like the debt ceiling, but as well as small issues like climate change. So that's what I'm really struck by. So there's a lot at stake with this debate beyond sort of just paying our bills, like our stature in the world. The security of the dollar is at stake. So I anticipate that there will be some more movement next week. But again, Congress will wait to the very last minute to tackle this issue.
All right. Ashley Etienne and Leslie Sanchez, always great speaking to you ladies. Thank you.
Thank you.